Most UFC fans can name champs like Khabib, Jon Jones, and Anderson Silva, but there are a bunch of fighters who actually held UFC belts that almost nobody talks about. In this video, I am breaking down 8 forgotten champions, how they won gold, and why the UFC story kind of moved on without them. Stick around till the end, because the last one is a champion who never defended their belt even once, and a lot of fans don't even realize they were the first in their whole division. When I say forgotten champion, I am not saying these fighters were bad. They reached the top of the sport, which is something almost no one does. The reason they are forgotten is usually timing. Their title reign was short, quiet, or messy, or a bigger star showed up right after them and stole the spotlight. Sometimes they were the first champion at a weight class, but another fighter made that division famous later. Over time, fans attach the belt to the more popular name and the earlier champ fades into the background. With that idea in mind, let's get into these 8 names and how their stories played out. First up is Dave Meni, the very first official UFC middleweight champion that almost no one remembers. At UFC 33 in 2001, he fought Gil Castillo for the brand new 185-pound title. Meni used his experience and well-rounded game to win a decision and become the division's first champion. On paper, that sounds huge. You would think people would bring his name up every time they talk about middleweight history, but his run at the top did not last long. In his very first defense at UFC 35, he faced Mario Bustamante and lost the belt by TKO. After that, Meni never got close to another UFC title shot. As the years went by, the middleweight division became known for stars like Rich Franklin, Anderson Silva, and later guys like Chris Weidman in Israel Adesanya. Fans linked the belt to their highlight reels, not to Meni's short reign. If you're honest, did you know Dave Meni was the first middleweight champ before this video? A lot of people didn't, and that is exactly why he fits this list. Next is Mario Bustamante, a champion who had the skills to be a big name, but who walked away before the boom. Bustamante took the middleweight title from Dave Meni at UFC 35 and showed just how good he was on both the feet and the ground. He had sharp boxing, elite Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and real fight IQ. One of his talked-about moments came in his title defense against Matt Lindland, where there was confusion over a tap and the fight had to be restarted. Even with all that chaos, Bustamante stayed calm and still finished the job. So why is he forgotten? Simple. In 2002, he left the UFC and signed with Pride in Japan. The UFC later stripped him of the belt, and he never came back during the company's big growth years. New fans grew up watching Anderson Silva dominated middleweight and never really saw Bustamante fight live. Today, when people list famous Brazilian UFC champions, they jump straight to Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo, or Amanda Nunes. Bustamante becomes a deep cut, a name hardcore fans know but casual viewers barely recognize. Now let's move on to a heavyweight who actually beat Randy Couture for the belt and still doesn't get much credit, Rico Rodriguez. Before his title shot, Rico built a strong resume by beating tough fighters like Andrei Arlovski and Tsuyoshi Kosaka. That run set up a fight with Couture for the vacant UFC heavyweight title at UFC 39 in 2002. In that fight, Rico had to survive early pressure from Randy, who was already a legend at that point. But Rico kept pushing, worked his grappling, and wore Couture down over the rounds. Eventually, Couture could not continue, and Rico won by TKO to become heavyweight champion. That should have been the start of a big run, but things went the other way. In his first defense, he lost the belt to Tim Sylvia. After that, issues outside the cage, including lifestyle and discipline problems, hurt his career badly. Rico kept fighting in smaller shows, while the UFC heavyweight story moved on to names like Frank Mir, Brock Lesnar, Cain Velasquez, and Stipe Miocic. So when fans today talk about heavyweight history, Rico's title win over Randy is more like a trivia fact than a key chapter. Be honest, how often do you hear his name in GOAT conversations? If you want to see how one fight can change how people think about MMA, Look at Maurice Smith. Back in the late 1990s, wrestlers and grapplers were seen as almost unbeatable in the UFC. Mark Coleman was the perfect example, a powerhouse wrestler with brutal ground and pound who looked like a monster. At UFC 14 in 1997, Coleman was the heavyweight champion, and he defended his belt against Smith, a kickboxer. Almost everyone expected Coleman to just take him down and crush him, but that is not what happened. Smith surprised people by surviving on the ground, using smart defense to slow Coleman down and dragging the fight into the later rounds. As Coleman got tired, Smith used his striking and much better cardio to take over. He ended up winning by decision and becoming UFC heavyweight champion. That one fight showed that a striker with good takedown defense and conditioning could beat a pure wrestler, and it helped change the way fighters and fans looked at style matchups. Even though that upset is a huge moment in UFC history, Maurice Smith is rarely mentioned when people talk about heavyweight champions. Most fans jump straight to the newer eras and forget the man who helped prove that strikers could really win at the top level. Sean Sher is a great example of a champion who helped rebuild a division but got overshadowed by the stars who came after him. When the UFC brought back the lightweight division, Sher was one of the key names leading that wave. At UFC 64 in 2006, he fought Kenny Florian for the vacant lightweight title. Sher fought exactly how you would expect from someone nicknamed the Muscle Shark. He used powerful wrestling, constant pressure, and strong ground and pound to win a clear decision and become UFC lightweight champion. He even defended the belt once against Hermes Franca at UFC 73, again relying on his cardio and top control. But his title run was hit by controversy. Sher tested positive for steroids, which led to a long, messy situation with suspensions and appeals. In the end, he was stripped of the belt. As the division moved on, fans started to focus on later champs like BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar, and eventually Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Charles Oliveira. Sher's time as champion turned into a small footnote. He was the guy who helped restart lightweight in the UFC, but not the one most fans remember when they think about legendary 155ers. If there is one name on this list that shows how fast things can flip in MMA, it is Renan Barão. At one point, Barão looked almost untouchable. He went on a massive unbeaten streak that stretched over 30 fights, which is insane at a high level. That run earned him an interim bantamweight title shot against Uriah Faber at UFC 149, and Barão won by clear decision. When Dominic Cruz stayed out with injuries, Barão was promoted to undisputed champion. He defended his belt against Michael McDonald and Eddie Wineland, and then stopped Faber again in a rematch. People were calling him one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Then, TJ Dillashaw happened. At UFC 173 in 2014, Dillashaw put on one of the most shocking performances ever, outstriking Barão from the start and finishing him by TKO in the 5th round. After that, Barão never really got back to his old level. He struggled with losses, weight changes, and a long skid that ended with the UFC releasing him. Now, when people talk about bantamweight greats, they usually mention Cruz, Dillashaw, Petr Yan, and others. Barão's crazy unbeaten streak and title run are still there in the records, but his name does not come up nearly as much as it should for someone who was once that dominant.
Now let's move to the women's side and talk about a champion a lot of people overlook, Carla Esparza. Many fans remember Joanna Jędrzejczyk as the face of early strawweight, but the actual first UFC strawweight champion was Esparza. She took part in the Ultimate Fighter 20, a whole season built to crown the inaugural 115-pound champ. In the finale, she fought Rose Namajunas. Carla used her strong wrestling, timing, and top control to slow Rose down, took her to the ground, and eventually got a rear naked choke finish to become the first strawweight champion in UFC history. That is a huge achievement, but her first reign did not last long. In her first defense, she faced Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who had sharp Muay Thai and great takedown defense. Joanna stuffed her shots, lit her up on the feet, and took the belt in a dominant performance. Joanna then went on a long, exciting run and became a big star. Because her reign was so loud and full of highlights, a lot of casual fans think of Joanna as the real first champ at 115. Esparza, who actually started the title lineage, often gets left out of the conversation, even though her win over Rose was the true beginning of that division. Finally, let's talk about Nico Montano, maybe the most unusual champion on this list. Montano became the first UFC women's flyweight champion by winning the Ultimate Fighter 26. In the finale, she fought Roxanne Modafferi, and even as the underdog, put on a tough, gritty performance to win and claim the inaugural 125-pound belt. This should have been the start of a fresh new chapter for the division, but her reign almost never got going. Montano dealt with serious health issues and had big problems making weight. Her first planned title defense was against Valentina Shevchenko, one of the scariest fighters in women's MMA. During fight week, Montano ended up in the hospital and the bout was called off. After that, the UFC made the call to strip her of the title, and she never defended it even once. Then Valentina stepped in, won the vacant belt, and went on to dominate the division for years. Because Shevchenko was such a strong and active champion, most fans today think of her when they think about the women's flyweight title. Montano's name, even though she is officially listed as the first champ at 125, is almost never mentioned. If you have watched this far, you are clearly not a casual, so let me know in the comments whether you already knew she was the original flyweight champion.
So now you know 8 UFC champions that almost never come up when people argue about the GOATs or the best title runs. Some of them left too early, some of them had their reigns ruined by problems outside the cage, and some of them were simply overshadowed by bigger, louder stars who came after them. But all of them climbed the same mountain and wrapped a UFC belt around their waist, and that part of history is still real, even if fans don't talk about it much. Next time, I want to flip this idea and look at the other side. Fighters who were good enough to be champions but never actually got the belt. If you want that video, tell me the first name that pops into your head when you think uncrowned UFC champion, and I will dig into those stories.